Hi, everybody. My name is Stacy Volsi, and we're here with Dr. Flo Cofer, who is running for Sacramento Mayor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My name is Voma Volsi, with the Ring of Democracy. Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
I'm glad to be here today.
Well, thank you. And before we start, I just want to say that the Ring of Democracy is a nonprofit, but we are not a political organization. Our goal is to empower disadvantaged communities and to take action and advocate for themselves. So we are doing these sit downs with our electoral candidates to ensure that the community is aware of who they're voting for. So thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, so in our effort to basically further democratize the electoral process and how we get your message to the people who needs to hear it. This is why we are basically sitting down. So with that being said, we want to go right into it.
Do it.
Give you a quick opportunity, take about 2 minutes before we go into questions. So basically, tell us what drove you here to run for mayor of the city of Sacramento.
Yeah, I am running for mayor of Sacramento because I really love this city. I moved here 20 years ago to do a fellowship with the Department of Public Health. I'll be honest, the palm trees on Capitol Avenue really sold me because I was coming from Michigan where your teardrops freeze, in the corner of your eye. And so being here and thinking about never shoveling snow again was a real draw. But as I got here, one of the first things that I really saw was a tight-knit neighborhood, a community with tight-knit neighborhoods that really cared about each other. The rivers are flowing through it and reminding me a lot of home, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was born and raised there. My parents were both public school teachers, and they taught me that community takes care of each other. Anybody, literally anybody in our community who wanted to go to college knew that they could ring our doorbell at any time in the afternoon or evening, and they would sit down at our dining room table and get support from my parents for their college applications. And my dad on the way out the door would be saying, now, tell your mom or dad to call me so we can work on those, financial aid applications and FAFSA and all of that. And unfortunately, when I was 11, we were at my aunt's birthday dinner and my dad collapsed and he died from heart disease. It's the result of many years of him smoking. And he started smoking at a time when the tobacco lobby lied about the harms of cigarettes and when they were really heavy in their marketing, especially in Black communities. And so I ultimately grew up feeling like, I didn't want anybody else to experience what I did. And I got into public health because I wanted to maximize the number of years in our life and the amount of life in our years. And it came to me really, clearly from my own lived experience, how much of our life and death is wrapped up in the policies that exist to protect us or don't. And so when I got here, one of my first accomplishments it was after the Affordable Care Act was passed, and this is now my first job after my fellowship. And I actually got to write the testimony that allowed for birth control to be included for no copay in Obamacare. And it was the first time that I realized, wow, government really can work for regular people, not just people with big money or deep pockets, but it can work for the rest of us. They're going to do things that really improve our lives. And so for me, from there, I wanted to continue to serve Sacramento. So I got involved in the Active Transportation Commission, trying to make sure that people were able to move about the city without being harmed. I then, joined the Mayor's Climate Commission and started developing our climate action plan. And then I joined Measure U, which was the Tax Advisory Committee. And I chaired that committee for 4 terms. And what I learned along the way is that our city has lots of committed and dedicated people. We see it every year on Thanksgiving morning when 30,000 people, the largest in turkey trot in the country, come out to do Run to Feed the Hungry. We all have one of those Run to Feed the Hungry shirts, right? And we're supporting the food bank. So people here care, but we have not had the expertise and lived experience of Sacramentans really taken into account when we're doing leadership, and we need to make space for that. And that's why I'm running for mayor. I'm running a people-powered campaign because I want us to actually come up with long-term sustainable solutions to the challenges that we're facing. Because what we're doing right now isn't working, and we all know it. We all feel it. I've knocked 30,000 doors at this point, and every single person who's answered has said, homelessness and housing is an issue. We need to protect public safety, and we need to think about jobs and how much people are paid. And oh, by the way, also climate change. It doesn't change. So what we need to do is harness that people power and actually come up with some goals and some solutions and work toward them together.
Well, Thank you so much for that. Just picking back off homelessness really quick, right? What do you think the main cause of homelessness is, and how do you plan on fixing that as Sacramento mayor?
Yeah, so this question comes up a lot in terms of what is the cause of homelessness, right? And the truth of the matter is the cause of homelessness is economic factors. It's people not being able to afford housing. So let's just do some quick, numbers. In 2013, we had 2,500 people experiencing homelessness in Sacramento, and 70% of them were sheltered. So downtown and other places around town did not look like a tent city because we did not have that many people sleeping on our streets. And fast forward to 2022, which was our last point in time count, and we'll have new numbers shortly. We had almost 10,000 people sleeping on our streets who were unhoused, and 72% were unsheltered. So if it feels like this problem has gotten worse in a really short period of time, it has. It's gotten exponentially worse during a time frame where it really shouldn't have, because we had opportunities to slow this down and the policies that were passed didn't protect us. And so some of those we had an opportunity to have real rent control. And instead of the city getting behind that, and this was 2020, so this is before about 4 or 5 members of the current council joined, but the entire council at the time, including one of my current opponents, opposed real rent control, which would have made sure that people's rents weren't going up almost 10% every year, and actually sued the person who did get it on our ballot. But they paid to send mailers with their faces on it saying the whole council opposes rent control. And so had we done that, 4 years ago, we'd be in a very different position, because one of the things we know is that every one person we get rehoused right now, 3 more people are becoming unhoused because they can't afford the housing cost numbers here. Our minimum wage is $16 an hour, and it costs almost double that to afford the median listing for an apartment in Sacramento. The reason why almost every union that has had a contract negotiation come up in the last year has had to threaten to go on strike has all been citing wages and literally the cost of living here. So what has changed here is that the cost of housing has gone up so much in Sacramento. Wages are not going up because most people work in the public sector. And so we have to do something about making sure that people can afford to live here, because our seniors, people over 55, are the fastest growing number of people joining our unhoused ranks. It's just, and I'm talking to people 18 to 35, and they're saying, I don't know if there's a future for me here. And there's no city that survives when young people leave and don't come back. So we absolutely have to address the root causes, which is affordability. People can't afford to live here, nothing else will happen. So the ways that I want to approach this are, first and foremost, we need to make sure that the people who are currently housed stay housed. We had 4,500 people who were still on the list when the COVID money ran out, who needed assistance to stay housed. If we don't do something, they will eventually end up joining the ranks of people who have been displaced, who either have to leave the state if they have the resources, or they end up joining our unhoused population. So I want to make sure those people have the resources. They're at imminent risk of homelessness, and they need the resources. I want to also make sure that people who currently can afford their housing can continue to. And that means we need real rent control. And I also want to make sure that the people who are currently sleeping on our streets are treated in a humane and dignified manner. Because the organization that I work for, we did a campaign called the All Hands campaign. And we just went around and we showcased people's hands. And then there was a digital counter that showed how many days people were away from homelessness. Never got to see their faces. And so it would surprise you. Some, well manicured hands. And it's like, if I lost my income today, I'm 10 days away from homelessness, right? I'm 30 days away from homelessness. And then the people who were currently we mixed them all in. And so one of the things we know is that we have to treat people with dignity, because if a few circumstances change, a lot of us might end up not having a place to sleep. And so I want to make sure, when I think about my own human dignity, I need a place to use the bathroom, because it's not an option. I use it multiple times a day, and I want to do that with dignity. I need a place to shower, because again, that's part of my hygiene. I need a place to wash my clothing. I need a place to charge my cell phone so I can access resources and stay in touch with people. Those are the minimums that I need to be able to have dignity. And I also need to have a place to shelter myself from the elements. And so we need to set up safe ground around town where we can actually have trailers or whatever it is, and trash pickup and triage people into services. But we need to have a place where people can go, because right now, all we've done is tell people, well, you can't go here, you can't go here, and you have to leave here, but we haven't answered the question of where people go. And if we start with those 2 things, we can get a long way. But the last thing we need to do is build affordable housing, and we need to address the pain points on that, like materials costs. which we can do by doing joint purchasing and saying, hey, we want to prospect in the same way the airline companies, lock in a price on gas so that their prices don't have to go up and down when the gas prices change. We could do the same thing for materials. We could do community benefits agreements with our neighborhoods to make sure that people aren't using the CEQA environmental process to be able to try to get the things they need in their community. We can have local hire, we can have other requirements already baked in when a project comes up. And we can also do some of the CEQA approval in advance because we know what vacant parcels exist. We know what land might be prospected. There's nothing requiring us to wait until a project is coming before us to hold up the process by doing CEQA then. So all of those things are just preliminary ways that we can address some of the challenges, but we absolutely need to do this, and we need to have a leader who understands, who's compassionate, but also understands the practical needs and is willing to bring all of the people in our city together to get to those answers.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Flo, one question I have, because then you mentioned rent control, but what specific programs do you intend to support to keep people housed due to the rising costs? Because you mentioned that is a problem that's going on. So what?
Yeah, so rent control is number one because, right, if I get into an apartment right now, let's say that apartment is 30% of my income, which means that I'm not overburdened by the cost of housing. It means that reasonably, if I'm spending 30% or less on my housing, I have enough money to be able to afford food and to be able to afford my transportation costs and other things, and even save up so that if I have an emergency, I have money to cover those costs as well. And so let's say I get that apartment, and then next year they raise the rent by 10%. And then the year after they raise it by another almost 10%, it's 9.3. And so eventually, if my income's not going up almost 10% a year, I'm going to get priced out of the apartment I used to be able to afford. And so that having real rent control, having real caps that don't outpace the cost of, my income increases are really important to be able to keep people housed and make sure that we're not just driving up costs. So that is critical to being able to keep people housed. And the other part is being able to assess what are some of the places where people currently can't afford their housing because it's already crossed them over, and are there ways that we can step in the immediate term to help? Again, those COVID recovery dollars came in handy because we were able to give people a few $100s here and there to meet the gap between what their rent was and what they had available. We need to be thinking about what we can do, and then what are the long-term solutions? Are there some ways that we can negotiate lower rents together for people, in an apartment complex? Are there some other ways that we can help to subsidize? Are there some state and federal matches that we can get in place? Because it is so much less expensive to keep somebody housed than it is to have to go through the whole process of getting them rehoused afterward. And then we need to be looking at how do we make sure we have long-term solutions to this? So we have places where the rent's not going to go up, affordable housing, right? How we have mixed incomes in places so that we have communities that are actually diverse and that have a lot of skills. One of the benefits for me of growing up in a mixed income community is that, again, my parents were able to help, the other students in the community with their college applications and getting them connected to educational resources because they were public school teachers. And also there were people in our community who helped babysit me or help fix things or help mow our lawn, right? It was a community that took care of one another. And when we have mixed income communities, the same thing can happen. And so that's important for us to be able to create ways that we can have long-term sustainability for those housing options. And that can include everything from having co-op housing, having some public housing, and also making sure that housing is affordable by lowering the cost to build.
Great, thank you for that. I was going, I went on your website, going over your policies and your platform, and the city of Sacramento has a goal of reaching zero emission by 2030. And here in Sacramento, if you drive an electric vehicle, for an example, you'll notice that it's hard to actually, charge your vehicle. Like for you to be able to charge your vehicle, yeah. So, so for you to do that, as the rate of people who actually drives electric vehicle increases, right? There's just not enough electric vehicle charging stations in Sacramento, period. How would you work with other organizations who sees a zero emission by 2030? How would you work with other organizations to make sure that, you know, the structure for EV charging stations is there. And also second part to that, the jobs and the economy that comes with that is also there.
Yeah. So one of the big things that I'm really excited about is that I want to create a green jobs hub here in Sacramento, because I think it is a way for us to be able to feed two birds with one feeder. And I'm using that instead of killing birds with stones, because I'm trying to use less violent imagery. Like, we can all eat and we can all be happy and no birds have to die in the making of this agreement. And so what I'd like for us to do is have living wage jobs and also be able to support our climate goals. And one of the things we need to do is we really need to be thinking about what are the new technologies that we can be on the cutting edge of. We have Aggie Square coming. It's supposed to be an innovation center where we can seed new businesses. It would be great if we can, again, focus those on this area. It's great that we're actually in District 2 for the city, because most recently we just had, the opening of some EV chargers over here. Shout out to Simeon Gant and Green Tech and the work that they're doing over here. So we need to shore up that grid. But as we all know, there are often, times when the grid is overtaxed, and then we end up with blackouts and things like that. Thankfully, we haven't had as many up here as we have had in Southern California. So we also have to find ways that we can store some of the solar energy that we are so glad to be blessed with a lot of the year in ways. And that's one of the places where the technology hasn't kept pace, right? We need to be able to figure out the storage situation so that we can actually have access, because we produce more than we need at the time we need it. And then it's like feast or famine. We also, as you mentioned, the big thing here really is that the major contributors to our greenhouse gas emissions are transportation. And so we do need to electrify, our grid. But one of the places we need to start is with our transportation system more, our public transportation system more globally. And so we did just recently this year, and I'm really happy that the city was able to buy some of the heavy duty vehicles that are electrified. But we need to make sure that the entire fleet is electrified, and that we're expanding incentives to be able to start with public transit. Start there and make sure that our public transit system not only is green, but also is something where people can opt in a way that is convenient for them and helpful, so that they can replace car trips and actually get where they need to go in a reasonable time frame. Because this isn't going to just happen with people who happen to not have cars using public transit. We all need to be using public transit more. And the way to be able to do that is to make it convenient and accessible. And also, if it's green, then it's doing just multiple things at the same time. And so that's really where I'd like to start. I'd like for us to look at our climate action plan and say, every year, what aspect of this can we do? How many vehicles can we purchase? How many EV charging stations can we set up? How many incentives can we participate in with a match or whatever our resources are that are available to be able to get us closer to those goals?
Thank you.
And Dr. Flo, can you elaborate on your vision for the Green Jobs Incubator in collaboration with SCTA and local unions, and how do you intend to ensure that Sacramento residents are equipped with the skills and training so they can capitalize on the emerging job opportunities in market?
Yeah, so, having a green jobs hub means everything from start to finish. So we take advantage of what we already have in Sacramento in terms of resources. And so some of the resources we have a really great community college system. We have really great colleges and universities right here in the region, right? And we also have, unions and job training centers. And so we come together and we say, what are the skills for the future and how do we train for those? So that no matter whether you're leaving high school and you go directly into the job force, whether you go to community college for some technical training or a trade school, or whether you end up going to one of our universities, you can plug in to the green job space, because we're going to need jobs that are going to need all different types of educational and training backgrounds. And so that's really important. We're thinking about, greening up construction. We're thinking about greening up, the ways that we do business generally. And there's a lot of money to be made, because this isn't just a problem in Sacramento, right? This is a global problem when we're talking about climate change and our need to address this. And so if we're able to innovate right here and do some of the work of electrification, but also some of the innovative work around the storage and other things that I've talked about, we have the ability also to be able to have an industry here where we can actually be a leader and we can train and we can do production and we can do other things for people all over the globe. And so as the capital of the fourth largest economy on planet Earth, we should really be taking advantage of, what we have as a spotlight and what we have as resources right here in the capital city to be able to do that. And I'm really just excited about this being one of our things. Like so often I hear people in Sacramento kind of their vision is so limited, right? It's like, how can we be little Silicon Valley? How can we be mini Hollywood? How can we be like da 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 da? I want us to be Sacramento. Really, truly, not just like the King, Sacramento proud, but actually proud to be Sacramentans and proud of what we do and having our own brand. I think a lot about, the city of Coachella, which most people don't know is a city. The brand is so big now that people think Coachella is just a festival. It's actually a city in California. And I want Sacramento to have a brand that's so big that when you think Sacramento, you think about the things we bring to the table.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. So just going back to homelessness for 1 second, right? Like the issue of homelessness is not a one size fit all, right? Situation. And I get a lot of what the mayor of the city is able to do, but also what the a city mayor is not capable of doing, right? Because we have the county that is responsible for health and human services. So how do you see yourself as mayor working together with the county to make sure we are addressing things like mental health, for an example, right? Because this is not a thing that the city can actually take on. So how do you envision doing that and tackling the issue of homelessness through a process of making sure we are taking care of the mental health aspect of it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. First of all, that, for all of our talk about the responsibility of the city, the county has a budget that is almost, 7 or 8 times that of the city. And the city makes up a third of the population in the county. So we really should be operating in partnership because of just how these two jurisdictions work and how they share authority. And they do have authority for things like mental health and behavioral health services. And, and they have departments and staff to be able to work on some of these things. And so that partnership is key. And for a long time, these two entities just didn't work together for a variety of reasons. And that has to stop. We have to come to the table and work on these things together. And so one of the things that I bring to the table as a leader is that when I was the chair of the Measure U committee, I did 2 things. The first is I brought together all the chairs and vice chairs of all the city's boards, committees, and commissions. The Youth Commission, the Disabilities Commission, the Planning Commission, and we come together and said, what are some of the things you're experiencing? Because here are our pain points. Here's what's working well for us. Here's what's not. And we were able to share. And then we sent a series of recommendations to the city clerk and to the mayor and the council to say, here are some things you could do that would make our jobs of supporting you and being your advisors a lot easier. It would streamline some of the challenges. So bringing people together to be able to identify those challenges is something that I've done in my work. But the second thing I did was I brought the Measure U committee and the Police Review Commission together, because the Police Review Commission was working on policy related to public safety and in particular the police department. And we had a good chunk of the police department's budget. And so we thought, here's an opportunity for us to come together. We have police department's budget, we have the Department of Community Response's budget, and now this is an opportunity for us to come together to talk about the things that are of mutual interest. And what we ended up doing was sending over to the city a request for the 911 data. We have UC Davis and some partners who already have funding to analyze those data. And we were going to say, look, if you want to shift some of these calls to the Department of Community Response, we're able to provide technical assistance. Now we're sitting here multiple years later and nobody ever responded. They left our messages on red, but we gave them that opportunity. And so I know how to bring two entities together to be able to come up with a joint agenda. And there's absolutely nothing statutorily or legally prohibiting the city council and the county board of supervisors from having a joint meeting multiple times a year where they sit down and they decide on things and they actually allocate budgets and resources and policies at the same time. And it would probably also streamline a lot of things because people could come to that meeting and could say, hey, I'm having this problem, hey, I'm having that problem. And instead of the city or the county having to say, go to the other entity, they're both here. so you can figure out who you're talking to. Because I know it's confusing when you have a city and a county that are both called Sacramento and you don't know where the line ends between one or the other. It's hard for regular people to figure that out if you're not like a policy wonk and working inside of it. It doesn't make you behind the curve. Sometimes it's intentionally confusing. And so our job as leaders is to make it less confusing, to make it so that we're more accessible to people and to show that we're going to be adults in the room that are going to work together. And so I've already had conversations with our supervisors about doing joint meetings, and I'm excited about doing that as your next mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And just to go on that, right? So right now, the city of Sacramento and the district attorney's office, they're going through a thing, right?
They're not going through a thing. This is one-sided. The district attorney came in and decided he was going to sue the city, not the county though, even though, like, let's talk about it, right?
Let's talk about it.
The county spent the CARES Act money on the sheriff. The grand jury got called in and said, what are y'all up to? The county executive got fired, right? Because he was intimidating people and not doing right. And so we need to talk about the fact that, like, it's particularly curious to me that the only entity that is being sued here is the city, but not the county for being derelict of duty. That's questionable at best, right? So let's start there. And again, so we're talking about lawsuits, right? Does that house anybody? Because it's wasting the resources of our city attorney, county attorney, and all of these folks, but nobody's getting housed. So we're in a place where 10,000 people are sleeping on the streets. And I'm convinced if you're not part of the solution at this point, I mean, I hate to be you're with us or against us, but you are part of the problem because you're wasting precious resources that could be better spent on actually serving people. We have people sleeping on the streets and it's raining outside. Why on earth are we suing each other? And why would somebody who hasn't even been in office a year think that their best first step is suing the very people that they're hoping to work with? It's counterproductive. And if we want to also be honest, it speaks to the environment in Sacramento because he thinks Darrell Steinberg wants to run for attorney general and he wants to run for attorney general. So this is his way of taking the wind out of Darrell's, supposed campaign, the campaign that hasn't been launched yet, and trying to also launch his own by getting some earned media. We should not fall for these theatrics, and we should expect better from our elected leaders.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Flo. So that was a lot to unpack. And with something you mentioned earlier, bringing different entities together. So like the different people in the city together. So in the meetings, they can collaborate and decisions can be made in a way that works. But my question regards community members. What is your plan? How do you envision promoting like community engagement in Sacramento to ensure that they have a voice, to amplify their voices in the decision-making process?
Yeah, this is a question that gets me so excited because I have been the community member and I have felt really frustrated because it has often felt like I am an obstacle to be navigated around by our city instead of a key partner to be, to be involved. And I think there's a lot of people in Sacramento who have kind of given up because we make it so difficult to engage. So there's a few things that I think are really important to do. The first is, I think it's really important that we involve the key advisors that we already have in the city, the people who are serving on our boards and commissions, to actually be part of the decision-making process. And so what I'd like to see our city do is at the beginning of every year, we introduce, the policies that we're interested in, very similar to what we do with the state. Our department chairs can introduce them, the mayor and council members can introduce them, and they go on the website. And they're on the website organized by category. Here are all the climate proposals, here are all public safety proposals, here are the parks proposals. And then they get referred by topic to our boards and commissions. So if it impacts young people, it goes to the Youth Commission. If there is some sort of structural, thing involving, we make sure the Disabilities Commission gets to have a review. If it's going to involve Measure U money, it goes to Measure U. And that's the first stop. And there we get to hear from community members and from our neighborhood associations and from our unions and from our community-based organizations and neighbors, right? What we think about something. There's time. There's an opportunity to have a conversation. There are amendments that can be proposed. People can say, I want to be an official sponsor of this. I'd like to co-sponsor. All of that information can be gathered by the people who've already volunteered to be our advisors and our community ambassadors. And then once we've done that process, then it gets sent over to the council for review. And that's part of the staff report. And it says, here are all the people who are in support. Here are all the people who are in opposition. Here are the proposed amendments. Now we can have a conversation. Instead of what we do right now, which is an agenda is posted on Wednesday or Thursday, the meeting's on Tuesday, and you have 5 days, including the weekend, to gather together whatever you're going to do and 2 minutes on public comment to hope you can get them to change their mind if there's something you disagree with. And if there's questions you have to ask. That is sending the signal in the way that we set it up that we really don't want to hear from you. We're doing what's legally required because we have to. So we hope you don't hear about this, and we really don't want you to be a key partner with us. And I don't think that serves us well, because we have people living in our communities who actually have important things to share with us that could make what we're doing better. And so I want to make sure that their energy is harnessed. And then the second thing I want to make sure we do is that we're actually out in the community, not just attending existing events, but inviting people to events that are happening in the district, having meetings there where people are able to come and talk to us, doing community benefits agreements, conversations in advance of a project. We are so reactive by design that we wait until there's a problem to ask people what we should do. We should be proactively asking people on a regular basis, what's going on here? What do you need? How can we partner? How can we help? And then the last thing that really is important to me is that we have goals. I know that's abstract and everybody's like, what does that mean? It means that, like I said at the youth forum last weekend, by the end of my first term, I don't want there to be any young people sleeping on the streets of Sacramento. There are currently 1,500 people who are young people or their families who are experiencing homelessness. And I think as the capital of the 4th largest economy, we can do better. So now there's a goal out there. And as soon as I say that out loud, everybody's wheels start to turn. I saw yours do it, right? You start thinking to yourself, how can I help? How much will that cost? Who gets involved? What can I do? What can my organization do? What can the small businesses do? It immediately gets you into go mode, because now we're all working towards a goal. Right now, we have people ordering water on Amazon when it's 150, or 115 degrees outside, and they're taking it, right? And we have people who are volunteering here and there, but there's no coordinated effort toward a goal because our city hasn't set any goals. We've talked about homelessness a lot, but we don't actually have goals that everybody's aware of, that this is what we're doing this year. And when you do that, you rally people around a common good and you give people options for how to plug in. And everybody is thinking in the same direction, because the problem is not, oh my gosh, this problem is so big. It's now something that's tangible. It's now something that's concrete. And everybody is thinking about going in the same direction. And so those are the ways that I want to get our community members involved.
Yeah, thank you for that. So 2 questions, right? One is, first thing anyone's going to ask is like, how do we pay for that, right? That's the first question anyone's going to ask. And
Great question.
And second part, and it'll move away from that a little bit, like what are some incentives that, as a city, we are able to provide to developers to come in and build affordable housing?
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with how we're going to pay for that. So again, we have a lot of money that is spent in this region to address homelessness and housing, right? We have the money that we spend on enforcement. We have the money that we spend on temporary shelter. We have the money that private entities are currently spending to be able to deal with whatever the ramifications are, right? And so once we articulate a goal, it then opens up the opportunity for everybody to figure out how they fit into the goal. One of my biggest frustrations is when we think government has to be the only funder of some of these things. The business community introduced Measure O because they felt frustrated that, homelessness wasn't being addressed in the way they were. Now, I think Measure O was wrongheaded, and I don't think it's going to yield anything, but I do understand the frustration. And I think if we said, here's our goal, the business community could spend, instead of millions of dollars trying to get us a toothless proposal that's not going to do anything, to actually help us with this goal, right? Because everybody is saying this is the problem. There are people in our community who would roll up their sleeves and write a check if they knew it was going to go somewhere, right? Like, the issue is not the money. It's never the money. Money is never the issue. The issue is always, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to mobilize people together? And the more we can get to that, the easier we can get to many of these goals. It's a matter of having some though, and really directing, but we can do so much more. I said 1,500 because it's concrete. I guarantee you, if the city of Sacramento comes together and sets an ambitious goal, not only will we meet it, but we will exceed it, because people get excited when they have something to work toward. So that's the first question. Now, when it comes to incentivizing developers to come here, I think part of, we want to be a pro building, a pro, like, let's really address this, right? Because we do need more affordable housing. And I hear the pain points that our developers are naming. I mentioned earlier, materials costs. That bulk purchasing that the airlines do for gas is real. And that's a way that we could be able to do something very unique, because we could say, look, city and county come together, again, the benefit. And we say in this region, we're going to build 10,000 new units over the next 10 years. So we want to lock in a price for those materials right now. That's one way, right? To be able to address those pain points so that we can actually get these projects to pencil. Because it's true, if they're going to cost a lot, then, it makes it so that places where the costs are lower are going to be more beneficial. What would it look like if we didn't necessarily do away with the developer fees, but we were able to spread them out over the life of, a project? So you didn't have to pay it all up front and take those early hits, right? What are some of the ways that we can be creative with our policy making power to not undercut the city, but to actually get to the goals that we're trying to achieve? That's the type of thinking that you want from a leader, and the type of bringing people together and being able to say, look, I'm not beholden to your interests because you wrote me a check in my campaign, but you are a key part of this equation, and I want to hear from you. And so I've been sitting down with the apartment association, with the Metro Chamber, with some of the developers in the region and saying, well, what about? And they're not mad at my ideas. In fact, they're going, that's the way we should be thinking about this region. And so that's the next step.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that. And you have another question?
Yes, we're gonna close soon, but a user on Instagram asked a question,
Mhm.
and I wanted to make sure, I
Yeah,
saved
let's
this
do
for
it.
last.
IG question.
Yes, it was related to developers.
Okay.
They were asking, do you think developers and private funders have too much sway in local government?
So, I am the only candidate in this race that is not taking, corporate money. And that's really important to me, because I do think that, to use the analogy I did when I announced my campaign, that our city is like a choir, right? And right now we do have entities that I think have the sopranos, if I will call them, who have been over singing a little bit and maybe a little out of key. And so we need to bring you down and get you back in your register. And then we have people who haven't been showing up that we need to invite back to choir rehearsal. Come on, tenors, you can't keep skipping Wednesday nights. And then the altos, who are great for harmonizing, have not. We need to, come on, sing up. We need you to sing, right? And so we need to bring ourselves into harmony. And what I think right now is that we have seen the influence of, people with the money to contribute to campaigns influencing outcomes. We've seen the people who are funded by the apartment association oppose rent control. They oppose the tenant anti-harassment ordinance. It translates into these votes that come along later. And we see the people who have not been funded by those entities being more willing to engage and think about some of the things that are necessary in this region. And so my commitment is that I'm going to work with everyone, but I'm not taking money, because when I come to the table, I want you to know that I'm thinking specifically about the people who live here, about the people whose interests are not represented by money. And so when we come to an agreement, you're going to know it wasn't swayed by money. It's going to be because this is the thing that shows the best promise, that has evidence behind it, that is going to affirm human rights, and that is going to align with my values. Because at the end of the day, I have to go home and sleep with me. And I'm not going to, there's no money in the world that's worth me compromising my values. I don't need this job. I want this job. And I want to do a good job as your next mayor. And so that's what I'm going to bring to the table. And so I do think sometimes they have had too much of a voice because they have a lot of money. But it doesn't mean they're not a key partner in our region. It just means that we also need to balance their interests with the interests of the rest of the community. And that's what I want to do as your next mayor.
Thank you, Dr. Flo.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is something that we've been thinking about, and as we are in this process, again, like I mentioned at the very beginning of this, we want people who are not usually part of this process to enter the process. Because we know many hands make light work.
Light work,
It's-
light
it's-
work.
it's-
Come on, collaboration.
It's a real thing. So as we close this session, would love for you to take a minute or two, just to, elaborate on all the work you've been doing, and tell the people why you feel like Dr. Flo is the best person for the city.
Yeah, I've talked a lot already, so hopefully I won't take the full, minute or two. But the truth is here that, we have an opportunity. If we do what we've always done, we get what we always got. And we keep choosing a reality that isn't working for us. And you ever look around and you're like, nobody seems happy, so why do we keep doing this? Like, these are all choices. We have an option to be able to build the type of community, the type of city we want to live in. And I know sometimes it can feel daunting when we think about national politics and state politics. And that's what I love about local politics, is because you can have real influence. These are your neighbors. These are people you can reach out and touch. I am your neighbor. You're going to see me in the coffee shop and the gym and, walking around the parks. You're going to see me here, and we can we can really collaborate, not at some, 50,000 foot view, but at the street level. And that's what I think we need to be able to transform our communities, is new leadership, new thoughts, inviting people into the process, asking why you believe that and what we can do to work together. Because I do think in Sacramento, we have a lot more in common with one another than we don't. Like, Twitter will have you believe that we don't agree on anything, but the truth is we agree on a lot. We have the same goals about wanting to feel safe in our communities and wanting to make sure that we're not, harming people's human rights, and that we can all live with dignity. We want to have enough money so that the month runs out before our money does. Like, that's the kind of place we want to live, and those are the kind of lives we want to live. And I really think that Sacramento can be a leader in showing the rest of the state and country and world what it means to really live in partnership with one another. And so I'm excited about that. And that's what this campaign is about. And so I invite people to go to flowformayor.com, join our movement. We are excited to have you, because we see March 5th as the starting line. This is all just training ground. We're going to govern together. In the same way that we built this campaign, knocking on doors and having conversations, is the same way we're going to govern. And I'm really excited to do this with all of you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Flo. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today, and we're out.
All right.